Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Barrens Chat Podcast. This is a podcast about World of Warcraft by two guys who play it. And for today's episode, it's just Guck. I'm here by myself. Sod is a little bit under the weather, so we decided it would be best that I just get you guys a solo episode. It's going to be a little bit different. It's going to be a little more stream of consciousness. It's going to be fairly classic-centric. I don't have a lot of retail stuff to add in for you guys. To let you in behind the curtain a little bit, Sod has largely, I would say, even taken over kind of the retail side of things. I don't really play that much, if at all. I get my weekly horrific visions, and I do a Mythic Plus every now and then. I am enjoying Awakened. I am enjoying Nyalotha, but I haven't really played retail that much. So when it comes to retail content, we usually let Sod handle that. So today is going to be fairly loose and light on the structure. I'm going to focus on Classic, and we're going to have some fun. So this week was pretty big, right? We got into Blackwing Lair on Thursday. I know a lot of people started probably on Wednesday because that was when we had the global open of BWL. It was a ton of fun. I think everyone agrees that getting a new raid is always fantastic. So no matter what, just getting a new raid tier is something that's going to be good. But there is something really nice about BWL in the fact that it is a step up clearly in mechanical difficulty when you compare it to Molten Core, right? If you have done back-to-back or even close in proximity both raids, there is such a clear difference in the lack of mechanics in Molten Core and suddenly how introducing just a few mechanics into Blackwing Lair, you'll see a massive increase in difficulty. I will say that Razor Gore, the mechanics would have been incredibly unclear to guilds back in actual vanilla. But now that we're in Classic and we've had 15 years to work on it, Razor Gore is mechanically one of the more kind of weird fights. It's like one or two people are kind of dealing with the mind control and the eggs, and everyone else is more or less dealing with the ads, and then we get a very standard boss fight. Valistra's very standard boss fight with a little bit of extra mechanics worked in, but the fact that you essentially start in execute phase means that it becomes a face roll. I just find that, you know, we definitely get a step up in mechanics, and that step up in difficulty makes the raid better, and it's definitely a far better raid than Molten Core. I'm having a ton of fun doing it, but I don't think that the difficulty is enough for what people used to say, oh, vanilla raiding is so hard. Like, it doesn't really back that up. I'm waiting for AQ. I'm waiting for Nax. I want to see these actually, like, end game, end of vanilla's lifespan raids, because I just don't see the difficulty. I mean, and the crazy thing is, even though this is an old game, this is a 15-year-old game, you're still going to find guilds that are not wiping at all. Obviously, you'll find those people because they've been playing on private servers this whole time, but then you'll also find those groups that are wiping constantly. I am in a group that is somewhere in between. So on Thursday, we did a great job of getting through the first three. We did the first two bosses, made our way through the suppression room, and then got, I think, Lash Layer, whatever his name is, the third boss. So we got that down, and then on Sunday, we went back into BWL to try and get some more done. Very clean way to the boss. The nice thing about killing Lash Layer, the suppression room is effectively gone. But we got into the Drakes, right? So, and everyone talks about the Drakes being essentially, you know, loot pinatas, but we ended up struggling. It was kind of insane. All of Sunday, we raided for 3 hours, and we did not kill Flame Maw. So, and you think like, okay, what's going on? Like, there's a lot of stuff that could be, you know, at fault here, but the clear thing that we were dealing with was this mechanic idea. Like, we didn't have a fight where it's just spank and tank the boss. Our healers weren't managing their stacks very well. They stood within line of sight of the boss for too long. They accumulated too many stacks, and then when they went away, the cycling of healers wasn't sufficient. So there were too many healers, either LOSing themselves or otherwise unavailable. When the tanks needed to be healed, the tanks didn't get healed, and they basically died on almost every single pull. It ended up being a the tank's dead again, tank's dead again, tank's dead again kind of night. Um, Obviously there are some issues with that. So Flame Maw can like batch up attacks, and then when you finally do pull it, if you've range pulled it, our tanks were getting slapped for like 7k immediately. It was pretty ridiculous stuff. So they were definitely getting some crazy damage, but it came to a point where we would get more consistent pulls, where we were getting through that moment, we were getting into the fight, but still, somewhere between 80% boss health and 40% boss health, the tank would just drop. And it would just be like I'm looking at my LVY, I'm looking at the raid frames, and I see his health just like 50, 25, sit for just enough time for you to snipe a heal and drop. And it's like a consistent thing where we're seeing healers fuck that stuff up. And then the one thing that really bothered me, we had a tank go down, and this was one of the tanks, because in Flame Maw you have about 3 tanks at least that are rotating through, and this guy consistently was dying with cooldowns up. And as a tank, you use your cooldowns. Like, that's, if you die and you could have pressed that button, that's on you. So we had several, like, we had technical wipes, we had healer wipes, we had tank wipes, and all on what everyone calls a loot pinata, the first of the drakes, right? So I know when people say that, it tends to focus on the latter two in the 3, but still, like, if you compare this to Mythic raiding, this is not hard. The mechanics are very straightforward. It's essentially a tank swap, right? You have a tank swap, but instead of with 2, it's with 3, and LOS is involved. That's totally fine. The DPS are doing the same thing, so it's not a hard mechanic for the tanks to manage. The healers, same thing. They have to cycle being within line of sight of the boss so that they can heal the tanks and then move out, right? So you have to have a group of either like 3 groups or however you want to do it. And the DPS just kind of move in, they slap, they get stacks, and then they move out of line of sight. And then once those stacks are gone, they move back into slap. It's not a hard fight. The mechanics aren't the problem. We're totally having issues with execution. I just think, there's a lot to unpack there. I think based on what I've introduced, the mechanics that are in fact an increase aren't sufficient enough to be responsible for wipes. So I don't think it's really like, oh wow, there are mechanics and these are hard. It's a nice change. It's something that's good that they finally introduced now through and I mean, they'll continue to introduce through Classic and obviously into retail. Right, so the mechanics are good. I don't think it's enough to warrant wipes, and I don't think that at this point in BWL progression, it should have been an issue, really. But I have also heard that this is kind of around where some guilds are. We did wipe for a very long time. We wiped for 3 hours on Sunday, but I still don't think we have as many wipes on Flame Maw as some of the other guilds. But it's just something that's kind of frustrating because it didn't need to happen. We could have had much better execution, and with that better execution, the boss would have been down. No problem. So what I'm expecting we get it down this week. I think when we go back, we'll do a re-clear of our progression. I think we'll get the first 3 down, no problem, now that everyone should be pretty confident with the fights. We may even squeeze in another MC and Onyxia clear, just to like really round out the gear. But I'm confident that this week, now that we really know what's going on, and hopefully once the healers have gotten a more effective kind of group rotation, same thing with our tanks and managing the knockback and the breath, I think we'll be set. I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic that we will end up getting through. We'll probably, if we do get Flame Maw, I'm confident that we get the other two Drakes, right? So I think at that point that just leaves Chromagus and Big Neff. So I'm excited. I think that if we do pull something out this week, we could hopefully start doing Chromagus on Sunday. And I think that's respectable. It's definitely not fast. It's definitely not the quickest on our server. Um, but I think it's respectable enough considering how casual most of the guys are, myself included. A lot of the DPS are pretty hardcore, but it's not a pervasive guild wide thing. So the fact that we're not super cutting edge rating at this moment, it's not that big of a deal. But I am optimistic. It's not like we're butting our head against the wall. We're definitely going to make progress, and we've had cleaner and cleaner pulls on Flame Maw, so it's not like we just stagnated. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I think we'll do well. I think we're gonna improve. That's pretty obvious. Like that, you just have to improve. If you're not improving, then what's the point in rating? And these guys significantly improved. They got faster and faster through MC, which is just a clear kind of gear indicator. And I'm excited to see what the group does through BWL because it feels like the first real raid, whereas Molten Core just felt like the first raid bosses. It's just like there are bigger, larger models with more health, and they hit harder, and they actually require healing constantly. And other than that, there wasn't really anything going on. Now in BWL, there's stuff going on in your fights, and that's, I think, really good. That's a really good improvement. Overall, super happy with BWL. I think most people are. Let me know what you guys thought about first week of BWL. If you guys had a good experience, if you guys have already cleared it, if you guys got stopped at Razorgore, or if you got stopped at Vale, whatever it was. Definitely let us know. Let us know about your experiences, all that nonsense. We'll talk about it. We don't get many tweets. We don't get any emails. So you guys know where to contact us. You check us out on the website. Check out the Contact Us tab. Send in your BWL stories. We'll talk about that if we get some. I would say the next thing I kind of want to talk about is comparing vanilla rating to retail/mythic rating. I as a DPS raider now, I've kind of made this switch in Classic over to DPS because we didn't have a guild. I mean, when we started, I'm going to go off on a tangent right now, so stay tuned, buckle in. When we started, and by we, I mean me and Sod, when we started Classic, we had a lot of people playing, and we were ambitious in the idea that we would start a guild, which was cool because we had people already diversifying their classes. People are like really kind of thinking about rating at their at the character creation screen, which was cool. But again, really ambitious. A lot of people played, but not a lot of people kept playing past, man, it must have been like 30 or 40. I think by the time I was getting into Scarlet Monastery, so yeah, we did like SFK runs, we did the Wailing Caverns and like that primitive stuff. But by the time the Scarlet Monastery grind meta started, they were all gone. It was like a ghost town. And I mean, luckily Sod stuck through it. And my other buddy Chad, he stuck through it, and they're both 60, but Sod doesn't raid, so it's like all of these people fell through, and it would have been so sick because we had a diverse roster, we had all these other so many different people doing so many different things, and I would have been able to tank, but it just wasn't in the cards. No one really felt like playing past that nostalgia trip, which is understandable. It's a 15-year-old game with 15-year-old problems. So I totally understand like getting what you wanted from it and then not coming back. But yeah, I mean, without a solid guild and without starting inside the core, it's really hard to become a tank in Classic. And if you did, props to you. as an outsider breaking into a guild and becoming their main tank, or at least the main off tank, and not just like, yeah, we'll use you as the third or fourth tank. So gear up for both, but we're not gonna like put you into one role or the other, which will probably impact your gearing. Um, you don't want to be in that spot. You don't want to be in that ambiguous spot where you don't know what kind of gear you're going for. Because if it's tank gear, you're not going to get any until the main tank is fully set, and if it's DPS gear, you'll be competing against people who will say that they're DPS full time, and that's true, and they'll have that leg up over you in getting their loot. So for me, I felt it was better to just make the leap into DPS. It's something that I had done before. I find it to be much easier than tanking because if you're a tank, you're doing the same thing that a DPS player is doing. You're going through whatever your ideal DPS rotation is. If you're trying to output the most as a tank, I mean, obviously you don't have to. You never have, as whatever class you play, you never have to try to do the most output. But if you do try to do the most output as a tank, you're doing a DPS rotation, you're doing a threat slash damage mitigation rotation, you're managing cooldowns, and you're managing boss position, right? And your own position wherein you're guaranteeing you're not LOS'd from the healers. Right, so there's so much more going into tanking in a raid, which is what I personally enjoy. I love doing that stuff. But inherently, because DPS is easier, it's just something that is more commonly done by the randoms in the guild, right? And whenever you join a guild, you're basically starting off as the random. And that's what I had to do. I had to do that in both of the guilds that I've joined so far. So, that's just kind of the way she goes. That's the way of the road. But that's neither here nor there, right? So I'm currently a DPS, and if we talk about DPS mechanics in vanilla, there are basically none. So far, at least, right? This is, of course, talking about just Molten Core, Onyxia, and BWL. But as a DPS, largely what mechanics you deal with are, okay, you got unlucky and you're the one with bomb, run out of the group to this predetermined location and then explode. Or wait outside Shazra until a certain time and then come in and attack Shazra as melee. Like, there's just not a lot of mechanically challenging stuff. So yeah, I mean, because there's not a lot of very mechanically challenging stuff, the gameplay ends up kind of falling down to like how much meters can I put out? And for a warrior, particularly Fury Warrior, it's a very simple rotation, right? You're pressing essentially two buttons on cooldown, and they have a very long cooldown. And then when your rage is above like 65 or 70, you start dumping into heroic strikes, and then you guarantee that you go into execute phase with a full rage bar. You dump it, you rage pot, you dump it, you keep dealing damage, and you keep dumping your rage in execute. It's very straightforward. But the one thing that I want is more mechanics. I want to do a little bit more, right? Like I said, with tanking, there's always something more than just your rotation. And oftentimes it matters to the extent that if you do it wrong, the whole fight can go south if you're the tank. So as a DPS, I want some flavor to add to my experience. Bombs are one thing, LOS is one thing, but you think about mythic raiding, and there is so much stuff that people have to do. Mythic, Uldir, the last real serious mythic that I did was Battle of Dazarlor, and there was some serious shit in that fight, in that raid. I remember the one boss that I think got the most wipes out of us that really shouldn't have was Mechator. Didn't need to take as long as it did, but it took a long time because a lot of the guys just couldn't handle the number of mechanics. There was the Buster Cannon. There was the mines that you had to plant in LOS. There were people getting shrunk and they had to go inside of sheep and disarm them. Like, all of these different things were just so much more to the fight outside of running through your rotation. Um, so I embrace stuff like that. I would love for there to be more stuff like that. I think Mythic raiding as it exists now blows pre-Mythic raiding out of the water. Um, just from my experience on Wrath private servers, Classic private servers, and now WoW Classic, it's just something that's such a higher level. And I mean, you look at people doing world first, the world first race, right? Limit and method. That stuff is incredibly challenging. It attracts a ton of eyes because people are interested in that high level content, and it's something that happens on a much higher level than any of these classic world first kills will get. And it's partially because they're not just because they're better looking and no one's ever seen them before, but it's also because it's a very challenging task and people who have raided understand why it's challenging. So yeah, I don't find vanilla, at least so far, Classic has not been a difficult raiding experience. It has been fun, and the challenge has come in different ways, which are largely gear focused. And that gear centric kind of challenge is more directly handled because you can very directly choose how you gear yourself and how you itemize. But it's not a challenge that I find very rewarding. And I think that's something that has been slowly wearing down on my love for Classic. I still love it. I'm always going to get on to Raid because that doesn't take very much time to just get on and raid. That's a wonderful part about Classic. There's no homework. There's no chores, right? There's no AP grind. There's nothing that you have to get on to do. So with Classic, you can just get on and raid, and that's it. So I'm going to do that, but I do feel like I'm wanting more from the DPS side of things. As a raider, I feel like I would get more out of DPS raiding, even on like heroic, and just being satisfied going for AOTC. So yeah, that's all stuff that I've been weighing on my mind. BWL is fun. This episode is obviously not normal. We don't normally do stuff like this. Sod was out. He's got a killer migraine. So I figured I would just put something together for you guys, give you something to listen to. If you have any comments, questions, whatever, you want to get in touch with us, you can hit us up on Twitter at BarrensChatPod, or you can hit us up directly with all our contact stuff on our website, and that is barrenschat.podbean.com. Thank you guys for listening as always, and we will see you next time.